Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed and ahead of the curve. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Into podcast. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. Today I'm joined with Rodney Phelps in Illinois and Derek Cottrill in Northwest Missouri. How are you guys?
Morning, Nick.
Doing well, Nick. Thanks.
Good. Hey, guys, I thought we'd just start with kind of some updates around the geography, just kind of crop progress, where you're at. I'll just let you start, Rodney, if you want to.
Yeah, sure. So corn, probably we'll start seeing some tassels into this week. Most of the corn will be middle to latter of next week for tasseling. Soybeans, we're anywhere from the real late planted ones are in the first trifoliate, and then most of the beans are flowering. We're just entering R1, maybe early R2, trying to get them finished up post-brand since we had all that water before this heat dome hit us.
Yeah. Appreciate that update there, Rodney. Derek, if you want to go next.
Yeah, we're similar to that. We got the earliest corn. We got tassels coming out now. Guys are switching gears primarily to fungicide applications, and like Rodney said, this week, I mean, there will be the earliest. I know some guys going to start putting on tassel fungicides at the end of this week, but I bet that'll start probably in earnest next week because there is still a lot of variability out there as far as crop stage goes. But a lot of that corn hitting that tassel time frame. On the bean side of things, again, similar to Rodney, we do have some later planted or replant type beans that are still in the vegetative stages, but I would say the majority of them are getting into that R1, R2 type time frame. So
Appreciate that, Derek. Yeah, for me, similar boat to you guys. The earliest planted corn is pollinating right now, some of that late March, early April stuff. And then we've got a lot of this later April stuff that's shooting tassels and some cases just maybe starting to soak or pollinate on some of the really river bottom type ground. But on the clay pan, it's just ready to start shooting tassels. That May planted stuff is kind of more in that V12-ish range, V10-ish, V12-ish range. So kind of that chest high corn. And then we have a fair amount of June planted corn, and some of that is not very big at this moment. I actually drove by some this morning that was just coming out of the ground. So still some that just got planted recently. And then soybeans were our earliest planted kind of late March, very early April. I've seen some of that the last couple of days that they are at R3 right now. And then we have a fair amount. You get into that mid-May stuff that's more of the R1, R2 time frame now. And then we've still got beans getting planted. Some of the first crop just in some of the really wet areas getting finished up now. And then a fair amount of double crop that's getting planted right now. So we're kind of, all over the board, just as the way planting was drug out. So is crop progress. So, guys, that kind of gives the range of where we're at. And it is quite a drawn out range, at least for me this year. But I thought maybe a good place to start would be a little bit of what's going on with that plant right now. So if we're kind of at that tassel time frame on corn, we're at that R2, R3 time frame on soybeans. Like, I don't know if Rodney or Derek, if one of you guys want to jump in. I mean, we know the corn's pollinating right now, but what is it doing as far as yield determination? What is stress doing to that plant, nutrient uptake, that kind of thing? I don't know, Derek, maybe if you want to start on corn.
yeah, and so prior to VT, the main focus of that corn planter. I guess so what stress is going to impact the most is going to be that kernel number per row on the ear type deal. So after about V10, that's when we get the rapid uptake of nutrients type deal. And yes, you hear a lot about, 50% of nitrogen being taken up after VT and things like that. Sure, there's still a lot of nutrients that'll be taken up after tassel, but what we got to understand is that nutrient demand per day is that's typically spikes for things like sulfur, potassium, nitrogen. Um, the corn plant can demand up to a half a pound of sulfur a day in that V10 to V14 time frame, up to 4 pounds of potassium per day, 7 to 10 pounds of nitrogen per day, depending on your yield goal and yield potential and things like that. And so that's what we got to keep in mind. And so right now that corn plant is in a very sensitive stage that any sort of stress, whether that be this heat wave that we're getting right now, the excessive moisture we had, if we got disease moving in, things like that, what's being impacted in terms of the yield equation is going to be that kernel number per row on the ear at this point prior to pollination. Now, once we get to pollination, that's when stress is going to have the biggest impact. Now, pollination is typically a 10 to 14 day window whenever that happens, and we'll certainly we're at the point now we need to make sure we have a plan in place for that window because it's going to be here sooner rather than later for most guys.
Very good points there, Derek. I think that's the biggest thing to drive home is just we're determined length that ear. So any way we can mitigate stress, we're helping maintain that length. And then as we get in the early reproductive stages, we'll be trying to maintain so we don't abort any of those kernels. But yeah, you're right. A lot of nutrient uptake left to happen, especially on the nitrogen side of things. But yeah, you talked about it. We don't think about potassium much on corn, but it is a huge hog in those late vegetative stages as far as potassium uptake. So good points. Rodney, I don't know if you want to mention just kind of like what's the soybean plant doing when we get kind of that R2, R3 time frame?
Yeah, excuse me. So same thing. It's pulling a lot of nutrient load, and it's starting to determine um, how many beans it's going to put in that pod, and how big those beans are going to be. And we always think of nitrogen and corn, but the bean plant is also cranking nitrogen. It's nodulating, but it's also using a lot of nitrogen at that stage. And so, once again, corn, we always think corn is a big hog, but the beans are cranking on, need a lot of sulfur, a lot of zinc, and the nitrogen. So we don't want to forget the micros in the corn and the bean crop and the nitrogen load. Now, I'm not saying we top dress soybeans with nitrogen, but I do have some accounts that do that, growers that do that, but that is a fine line timing. You got to hit it just right. But if your beans are healthy and nodulating, great, they are cranking to determine how many beans are going to put in that pod. And the stress factor coming into the beans is when they'll start aborting pods if they don't get enough nutrients or think they can't support what that plant has. They'll start aborting the pod. So it's very critical at this stage, especially if you're going to make a fungicide pass, that we make sure we've got some micros in there also to help them finish off.
Good
And
points, guys.
Nick, I would add with on the soybean side of things, but I've been given the stage we're at in that R1 to maybe some in R2. I always like to remind guys this time of year that at R2, on average, a soybean plant's only put on roughly 50% of its nodes at this point. And so keep that in mind that we don't stage soybeans based off their size, but I don't think we realize even at this stage how much growth is still left to happen on those soybeans. And so even though we got flowers, when we talk fungicide applications with beans, we still got lots of time for that to occur type deal. Because right now we're at a stage where the top of that plant will essentially become the center of that canopy here over the next several weeks.
I think it's a
Very
good
good
point.
point,
And
Derek. And I'd say too that 60 to 70% of your yield's coming from the middle of the plant. So
Yeah.
node 7 to 14 is usually where the majority of the yield come from. So spot on when there's still a lot of nodes left to be set on these beans.
Yeah, those are good points. I wanna correlate that back to fungicide timing, but real quick, just one sidestep. We were talking about corn earlier, micronutrient needs. Rodney's points just brought up another thought of mine. You know, we did the three of us a fair amount of biomass sampling last year on corn, and just one of the big trends that came up just on the micronutrient side. Rodney had mentioned those, but yeah, manganese, boron, zinc. Um, on a large scale, we saw those showing up short, at least within my geography. So I think boron is something that we're fairly focused on, and zinc quite a bit as well. But yeah, playing around a little bit more with the manganese piece of it. And so far this year, just some of the early sampling seems to be following that same trend. So yeah, I think if we get the macros in line, we have the pH in line, then that's when we start looking at some of these micros. And those are I just thought I'd mention them. Those were kind of trending as some of the more short ones last year. Um,
And I think we got to remember too, those micros are not mobile with inside the plant. And so if you're short on them in the soil, even if they'd taken them up earlier, that plant's not going to reallocate them like it would with, say, nitrogen and things like that. And so I guess my point being is timing is very important with them. And you take something like boron that's very important for flower pollen formation, things like that. I mean, very easy to address since it's needed in small amounts. Very easy to address in that fungicide pass around that time frame.
yeah, boron's one that there's a huge uptake late vegetative stages, but then there's a very long draw on that, so there's still quite a bit of uptake left to happen in reproductive. Um, but back to you guys were mentioning just where we're going to be at as far as canopy wise at R2, where that's going to end up at. I guess just to bring soybean fungicide timing into it, typically the data has said R3 works out as the best timing. What gets a little bit of a conundrum in my mind, though, is some of these really early planted beans that were right. We're the 1st of July, I guess, today, but we had some of these beans hitting there the end of June, hitting R3 that were planted really early. And so I guess I'm just going to throw the question out there. I guess I got my own opinions, but what are your thoughts that we have to be at fungicide application timing right at R3, right when we hit it, on these early planted beans when we're so far early in the calendar, versus a typical R3, I guess, within Missouri, anyways.
I
I
guess,
don't know. Yeah, go
Nick,
ahead,
my
Derek.
opinion on that. Now we got a lot of acres to cover, right? And so we're never going to be able to hit. You got to have some sort of window. Now, if I had my choice of where I'm going to hit beans, it's probably going to be actually into R4, if not even later R4. And one of the big reasons why is because R4s, when soybeans start to lose their ability to be able to compensate, and therefore stress is going to start to have some big impacts. It's going to stop after R4, putting on more nodes and more flowers, and therefore more pods. And so anything that happens to the plant that causes it to abort a pod is going to be a problem. But at R5, it wants to start focusing on, seed fill and rapid uptake of nutrients for adding test weight at that point. And so I want to make sure that I have that late R4, early R5 stage protected in my soybeans. Now, like I said, we got too many acres to cover that it's not realistic to think we can go hit all our soybean fields right at R4 as fast as the stages can move at times. But that's why I'd say if you are going to go a little bit on that early side at R3 type thing, um, that's where our premium, more longer lasting residual type fungicides are probably going to be a bigger benefit that can still protect those windows, even if you have to apply a little bit earlier. But the other thing about beans too is typically, now I don't want to jinx this here, but typically the fungicide application in beans isn't disease driven, say relative to like it is in corn with the tar spot and southern rust that we had last year and things like that. It tends to be a little bit more of a plant health type play in soybeans, and therefore we can get a little bit more flexible and wait a little bit longer, and basically base it off, what the plant's doing physiologically, rather than we have to get it on because we got some big onset of disease getting ready to happen. But that's kind of my thoughts. I'm big, especially this early right now. We're not there yet at that fungicide timing in soybeans. I'd be patient with it if I could.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess
and
that.
I'll
Oh, go ahead.
chime in that I'm spot on with Derek. Um, you know, beans I think differently than corn. I would rather err a little earlier on corn and probably a little later on beans. Um, and beans are a different animal. You could stage them today at R3, you get a little shower tonight, and they may put another note on and they back to R2. So that's the thing. I always want to be later in the bean cycle. And I also want to make sure that I've got some micros in there with it, and I've got some insecticide. There's just a lot of things in beans that I want to wait to see what's coming. And once again, like I said, if they're going to put another node on, then I want to wait a little bit so I protect everything. So I'm spot on with what Derek was saying.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts tend to line up that way. I think on the early planted beans, you can drag your feet a little bit longer. I've seen years where R4, we've gotten more ROI out of it than R3. Other years might be the opposite, but I just think to your point, Derek, about the canopy, right now we don't, especially with all the wet weather I've had anyways, the beans are pretty stunted. There's not a lot of canopy there. We're just hitting R3, but at Rodney's point, we could jump back to R2 if they add a bunch more growth on the top. And then Rodney mentioned insecticide. I start thinking about that from an insect standpoint. And if you're just going to apply fungicide insecticide at R3 and you do it this early, we're getting a lot of time for stink bugs to get reared back up again on the backside of it. So I think good points, guys. Rodney brought up fungicide timing and corn. I You guys can chime in. You can make comments. I guess I'll just say on that fungicide timing, I think sometimes it plays out where it maybe, and I think planning date kind of comes into effect, even though we generally don't talk about it, but it may come in one year where it's better at, there's really not a VT timing anymore. Pretty much most of these hybrids silk before they tassel. So let's just say it may be better at R1, and then the next year might be better at R2. It just kind of depends on how the year goes. Um, I know we can't, Derek made the comment, can't cover all these acres at one time, and he's exactly right. My only thing is just don't let it get so late that we're pushing into R3, because then at that point, I think we can still get a benefit where we're probably losing some bang for the buck if we wait all the way until milk stage before we apply. Now, there's situations where we'll still get a big bang out of it if we have a lot of southern rust or tar spot, but it's not something I always want to plan on. I don't know if you guys want to make any comments.
No, you're spot on. And the other thing is, if you had a planned fungicide is a planned pass, you still do it, and don't let disease. You want to track disease, but you also we're after plant health. We're after a lot of other things, stress mitigation. The weather we're having currently. Um, I can find tar spot about everywhere, but it doesn't like this hot. Gray leaf is going rampant up here. It isn't up to the ear leaf yet, but it's going crazy. I don't know southern rust if that'll be an issue. I haven't found any common rust is here, but not southern. Gray leaf, excuse me, loves this weather, but tar is here and it'll always be here. It's just will we cool off in the nights, and will we have the heavy dews and such that last till 10 or 11 in the morning to let tar spot really take off.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I don't have much more to add there other than I do tend to favor being a little bit more proactive on the corn side. um, opposite of soybeans here over the last 5, 6 years, it has been a disease driven play. Sure, we're still going after plant health and some other benefits that fungicides can bring you other than disease control, but the disease is inevitable. Like Rodney mentioned, the tar spot, it's here. It didn't go anywhere last year, even though southern rust kind of took the spotlight. Well, this year, we're not seeing much out of southern rust reports, which is interesting. To be this late in the season and not really see it moving up from the southern U.S. at this point. But regardless whether it's southern rust or tar spot, we know that disease is going to be there. And one thing I see happen every year is we got corn hitting tassels right now, and here in 2 weeks, I'll be like, why didn't you spray? And they're like, well, because at tassel, it looked good then. Exactly. That's when I want you, when that corn looks good, let's not be waiting around for that disease because it is inevitable. We've had record moisture. We now have high humidity, which could slow down development a little bit, but we're going to cool down again. But a lot of that initial infections happen. So if we do cool back off just a little bit um, after these really high temps, that's when it's really going to take off, and we're going to be in some sensitive stages. And if you didn't already have the fungicide on, that's probably going to end up being a problem type deal. So don't delay on that. I think Rodney said it, but have a plan. And if you got the plan, regardless of what it looks like, stick to the plan. I would, because it's pretty easy to get behind on that application.
Yeah, you guys pretty much nailed it. There was a few topics in there that I think we could elaborate on it a little bit more. Um, Maybe I'll elaborate just a bit, but you guys, yeah, jump in on your feelings, but you covered it fairly well. Rodney's right. I mean, this is perfect weather for a gray leaf spot. Just lots of humidity. It just continues to thrive, especially even in this heat. It's continuing to go rampant. That's not uncommon for us, anyways. That's one we'll see just about every year. I haven't seen any northern corn leaf blight myself, but with all the cool weather, I'm sure we've got it in the river bottom in a few places. Sensitive varieties are going to show that. But tar spot, yeah, it's here. There's been, I think if you look at the map, there's 3 counties in Missouri now where it's confirmed. There's one in Illinois. I'm pretty sure across Missouri you could find it in just about any cornfield or at least any sensitive variety, at least find a lesion of it. So it's here. Current conditions, though, with all this heat, is going to stall it out. It's not going to like that. The problem is, though, we know it's here. We know it's got a foothold. So once conditions, more ideal conditions, return, cooler, wetter weather, it's going to be able to take off pretty fast. And we saw that a couple of years ago. That when things return to what it likes, it takes off really, really quick. Um, one of you guys, were you going to jump in? Sorry.
No, no.
Okay.
The only other thing I was going to add on the staging and the fungicide and corn, one question I have been getting a lot here over the last week. We do have variable stands and a lot of fields with corn at different stages. And so when we say we want to go at VTR1 or, when we apply, simply put, it's typically whenever at least 50% of that field is tasseled out, I would call that whole field uh, tasseled out. So keep that in mind. If you got a field like a lot of people do that just, have a variability of 1 to 2 stages out there, wait till you can stage the field at least 50% at a particular stage, and that's what I call it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, talk about micros in corn, and when you're applying fungicide, boron to me is a big one for that kernel development. And to Nick's point, all of the mass quantity samples we had last year, the boron come up short in just about every one of mine. And so boron's a big one right now when we're wanting all the kernel and best kernel developed we can get. The more if we can get some boron in there to help out, that's a big play.
Yeah, for sure, guys. And then I'll just mention on tar spot, so it could flare relatively quickly, like we saw in 24 when things become more ideal for it. Just remember too that some fungicides are going to be stronger than others on tar spot. There's definitely some with the greater strength there. The southern rust, I think you both hinted at, but yeah, there was a lot of talk about it after last year. We had such high pressure, especially in Derek's geography. But there hasn't been that much so far confirmed in the US. And I think I talked to somebody earlier this week, and yeah, I gotta apologize because when I looked at the map last week, there were no confirmed cases, which is kind of unheard of this late in the season for all across the US. But I did see last night that there are some confirmed cases in Texas, but still nothing to the southeast, which normally has happened by now. And I got to look at the map from last year, and at this time last year, it was clear all the way up into Arkansas, and not like southern Arkansas, like clear up into central Arkansas. So the fact that we've not seen it yet close to us this late in the game is a good thing for us, anyways. So I don't know how much of a problem it will be now. This later planted corn, it will probably intensify its pressure, and we're definitely going to see it there. But on the early planted stuff, it might might outrun it. A lot of talk about different fungicides. There is some better fungicides than others on southern rust, but just yeah, so far it's looking like tar spot's got more potential of an issue, at least on this earlier planted corn, than what southern rust does. So just a couple things to be mindful of there. And then Derek, you kind of alluded to this, but yeah, that comment when people are looking at applying fungicide this time of year, I've gotten this, I don't know, 4 or 5 times over the last week, and I get it every year. I'm looking at this corn, it just looks super clean. I just don't know if I see the need to put a fungicide on. And I would just continue to remind people that we're not banking on what's there today. That's not why we're making the application. We're banking on what's yet to come. And there's a lot of stars aligning. I know this week is stalling things out, maybe a little bit on the tar spot side, but a lot of stars aligning for with all the moisture for this to potentially be a disease year. And then I also just think about all the saturation that we've had here early on this corn, and then probably a fair amount of nitrogen loss. Things like stalk rot's likely to become an issue, and foliar fungicides don't protect against stalk rots directly, but indirectly they help make that plant more healthy. They help protect more leaf area, which leads to stronger stalks in the end. So standability, I always think, is a huge play that never really gets factored in the yield piece when it comes to fungicide application. So I guess I just wanted to mention that as well. It, you got, oh, go ahead, Derek.
No, I was just going to say that was a really good point. Yep, that's I agree. I mean, think of it as a plan pass, and again, the better it looks is more of a reason to make essentially that insurance application of fungicide. We've already invested a lot into our crop in terms of fertilizer and nutrition and weed control and things like that. So if it looks good to me, that's just that much more of a reason to invest in that fungicide application.
Yeah, and I'll
Yeah,
make a
no,
comment on southern rust. I'm not a meteorologist, don't claim to be, but the hurricane season seems to be a kind of tamer this year, and so we're not getting a lot of the winds and the storms coming up out of the Gulf and the south to blow that stuff up. So hopefully it just stays at a low stage, and if it does come, it's late and not very heavy and won't have the impact it had a year ago. So I got my fingers crossed that the hurricane season is a light one.
good points, guys. And I guess, yeah, just one last comment on that, Derek. We were talking yesterday, you were mentioning as far as investing in those acres that look good or the high yield acres. I think that's, to me, that's probably a really good point for people to understand that this year, I don't know about you, but this year we've got fields that maybe didn't have the greatest of stands they got left, or we have fields that have big water holes and stuff in them. And just understanding that allocation of dollars is probably a really good idea in a year like this, where not everything's the same. Not going to say that those acres can't pay out on some of these inputs, but maybe on some of those extra things, it makes more sense to do them in some places versus others.
Yeah, that's been the big conversation I've been having with guys the last couple of weeks. Because again, I've already said it several times on this phone call. Variability has kind of been the theme or key word. It's not all uniform. It's not like 24 where it was pretty hard, not to raise a good corn crop regardless of what you do. This year, I think we're still going to have some really good crop, and definitely crop that still needs to be managed and invested in. It's just not going to be every one. And now I'm not a fan of giving up on any acre type deal, but I guess what I'm saying is a guy's management plan probably shouldn't be the same across the farm. And so I would just encourage everyone to work with your local retail, your local agronomist, whether that's myself or Nick or Rodney, and go through those areas. And is this the one where do I need to back off on something just because my yield potential is probably not in this field? I can back off on this field, but this one looks excellent. So I'm going to reallocate those dollars, and I'm actually going to push this one harder because that's where I'm going to get the most bushels from. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters is bushels. And so we're just going to have to get a little bit more creative, I feel like, this year in order to be have the most success.
Good points. I guess the kind of rolling into the last point I wanted to get into from an insect standpoint, I did just want to mention corn leaf hoppers. Those have been found in Boone County in the central Missouri now, corn leafhoppers have to make their way up. They have to migrate up every year, come up out of Central America. The reason why I bring them up, we hadn't saw that disease called corn stunt until 24, vectored by corn leafhoppers. We're seeing leafhoppers now. We've got a fair amount of late planted corn, like June planted corn, which is theoretically at much more risk from corn stunt from that earlier infection of it. And these leafhoppers are vectoring it. So I'm just making the point. If you have some June planted corn, probably I'd be watching it relatively closely. There's not a lot of data out there that says whether or not you should or shouldn't apply an insecticide. There's no established thresholds, anything like that. But man, if you have some late planted June planted corn and you haven't posted it yet, it would be something to at least take a look at and weigh that decision of whether or not to add an insecticide to take those leafhoppers out. I'm just bringing it up because it's something that we saw in a few isolated cases, but it was pretty bad in some of those cases, just the damage that they can do pretty quick. Um, anyways, I just wanted to mention that. And then I don't know if you guys want to mention anything. Obviously, for us, the Jap beetle population is exploding right now. We've got a lot of corn yet to pollinate. We've got beans reproductive stages. I don't know if you guys want to make any comments on that or not.
Yeah, they're here. And, I've said it in our prior podcasts. I have a linden tree in my backyard and they love the linden tree and they're here. They're just trying to survive till they have some silks and corn. They'll run field edges on beans, but they've really got to be, I say, like a herd of hogs through a whole field before you really get, really worried about them. I don't like them chewing on anything, but economic wise, they got to do a lot to make an impact. But I also say if you have a plane in the air and you need tank partners, insecticide in there, make sure you scout that insecticide with that fungicide pass. A lot of times is not a bad call either.
Yeah, I think your point, Rodney, I'll just say that it tends to be something that over the years people have been really worried about. And I always tell folks, I think I've only seen one cornfield in my life that I thought we probably should have sprayed them. Generally, they just work the end rows and those silks regrow so quick that usually they'll overcome that. We don't have any issues with pollination. Beans, I just keep an eye out because sometimes there are some bean fields that they do work over pretty hard, especially in the reproductive stages. But with that, guys, I appreciate it. I think we probably covered enough ground for one episode, but want to just thank you guys for your comments and thank everyone for listening. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.